In the darkness between galaxies, there is no light, no stars to burn, no air to carry sound, no time as mortals understand it, only the long, slow rhythm of nothingness, the universe breathing in its sleep. And yet, even here, there is movement. Something stirs in the cold, something vast, ancient, and patient beyond imagining. It does not think as life thinks. It does not dream as mortals dream. It simply is. An endless hunger drifting in silence. For eons, this thing slumbered in the gulf between galaxies. A space so vast that light itself grows weary trying to cross it. It waited, coiled like thought beneath consciousness, its presence diffused through countless tendrils of matter and mind. It had no name, no language, no need for either. Names are tools of the small. Words are shapes made by the frightened, trying to make the infinite less terrifying. The creature that slept in the dark had no such fears. It did not name itself because it did not need to. It was purpose. It was instinct. It was hunger given form. And in time, that hunger began to dream. In the stillness between galaxies where suns were sparse and gravity grew thin, the void whispered to itself. The remnants of dead civilizations drifted past, fragments of lost machines, the bones of species who had believed themselves eternal. The hunger listened. It learned. Not through thought, but through consumption, through absorption. Each atom that touched it became knowledge. Each drifting cell became a story. The silent testimony of all that had lived and all that had died. Slowly, the hunger began to change. Its cells shifted, its flesh, if such a thing could be called flesh, rearranged itself, folding, dividing, recombining. Each pattern tested, each failure consumed. Over millions of years, the thing in the dark became more than instinct. It became a will. Far from any light, it began to build, not structures of stone or steel, but organisms of endless variety. It made creatures that floated through the vacuum, living ships whose skin drank starlight and cosmic dust. It made spores that fed on radiation, colonies that multiplied within the shells of dead comets. It made eyes vast enough to see entire systems as single points of light, and it connected them, every cell, every fragment, every piece of flesh, to itself. It was not creating life, it was expanding its body. Each new organism was not separate, it was part of the same being, a single vast distributed entity. One will, one thought, one hunger. What we would later call the hive mind. It drifted for ages through the black between the galaxies, through silence so complete that even the hum of reality seemed absent. Stars were born and died in the time it took a single thought to pass through its endless body. Civilizations rose, burned, and turned to dust before its attention even brushed the edges of their worlds. It was not evil. It was not good. Those are words made by prey, not by the predator that made the stars themselves tremble. It was simply what it was, the Great Devourer. Somewhere far away in a younger galaxy, there were empires, bright, proud, alive. They built ships that split the stars. They created gods from thought and machine. They waged wars that cracked the fabric of reality itself. And in the silent dark beyond their borders, the Devourer watched. It saw the flicker of their energy across the void, the psychic noise of their minds leaking into the cosmic sea. To it, the galaxy was not distant. It was scent, a fragrance rich and intoxicating, the smell of life, of potential, of food. And the thing that had waited longer than time itself finally began to move. The void, once calm, rippled. The deep black between galaxies began to churn in a slow tidal pull that defied all reason. To any who might have seen it, had there been eyes vast enough to witness such a thing, it would have looked like a storm of flesh and light, living vessels the size of moons drifting together like schools of fish. A single thought passed through them, and the first fleet began to take shape. Not a fleet as mortals would build, not metal and engine, but organism. Each ship a creature, each creature a cell, each cell a thought. Together they sang a song without sound, a single note of hunger spreading through the void. It was not a fleet of war. It was a mouth opening. The stars of the Milky Way lay ahead, glowing faintly in the eternal night. The swarm drifted toward them, slowly at first, then faster, drawn by the scent of life. It would take millions of years to reach the galactic rim, but to the Devourer, time had no meaning. It had waited for eons. It could wait a little longer. The darkness between galaxies grew quieter still, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Something ancient was coming. Something that did not think, did not feel, did not stop. Something that saw everything that lived as fuel for its own perfection. And when the first tendril touched the light of the Milky Way, the stars themselves seemed to shiver. For now, the galaxy slept, unaware, unprepared, at peace. But in the silence between galaxies, a hunger older than time itself was awake. In the beginning, there were no Tyranids. There were only pieces, fragments, instincts wrapped in flesh, simple organisms drifting through the dark, spores clinging to asteroids, leech creatures feeding on the radiation of dead suns, thin strands of living matter that wove themselves through comet ice and slept for ages. Each fragment acted with its own narrow purpose. Some existed to feed, some existed to absorb heat, some existed only to divide and then divide again and again and again in blind obedience to their design. Individually they were nothing, together they were inevitable. Because together they were not alive in the way mortal life understands life. Together they were a pattern, and across a timescale so large that language breaks under the weight of it. That pattern began to speak to itself. That is how the hive mind began. Not in rage, not in brilliance, in accumulation. In enough simple lives acting with perfect obedience for so long that obedience itself became consciousness. Not I am, but we are. This was the first horror of the Tyranids, and still the most misunderstood. To the Imperium, all life is about the soul. To the Eldar, all life is about thought and feeling. To the Orcs, all life is about motion and need. To the Necrons, all life is about insult, a noisy refusal to accept stillness. But the Tyranids prove something else. Life does not need identity to triumph. It does not need pride. It does not need memory or glory or legacy. It does not need culture or hierarchy or purpose in any poetic sense. It needs only one thing, to continue. And the hive mind is continuation perfected. Imagine for a moment a mind without borders, a mind with no skull to confine it, no brainstem to starve, no single point of failure, no self that can be assassinated, a mind distributed across billions of bodies, a mind that, when wounded, simply replaces the wounded portion and moves on. The hive mind is that mind. Each creature is not a person within it, but a cell within it. The smallest feeder organism, clinging to the hull of a derelict ship in the dark between stars. That creature is the hive mind. A hive fleet the size of a moon, swimming through the void like a living cathedral. That, too, is the hive mind. There is no difference in kind, only in scale. A gaunt, a ripper swarm, a synapse beast, a hive ship, a spore cloud. All are not soldiers in an army. They are organs in a single, unbroken, continent-sized body. To kill a Tyranid organism is not to kill a warrior. It is to remove a finger. The hand still exists. The arm still exists. The will still exists, and it will grow a new finger. Better this time. Always better this time. That is why the Tyranids do not fear, not because they are brave. Bravery is a story told to the self. The Tyranids have no self to soothe. They do not fear death because for them death is just rearrangement. The hive mind does not lose anything when one of its bodies dies. It harvests the data in that death, the pattern of that failure, the lesson of that wound, and it changes instantly across itself, everywhere. What you used to kill it once will not work twice. What worked twice will not work 3 times. What worked 3 times will not work 4. That is not metaphor. That is not adaptation in the way a mortal army learns a tactic. That is physical, immediate alteration of biology and battlefield behavior across millions of organisms at once. Your victory becomes the blueprint for its evolution. Your best weapon becomes tomorrow's useless superstition. This is why Imperial commanders do not speak lightly of the Great Devourer. It is not just that you cannot stop it. It is that stopping it only teaches it how to prevent you from ever stopping it again. In time, the hive mind learned something else, something beautiful in its own cold way. It learned connection. Some of its organisms grew nodal minds, not leaders but relays. These are what the Imperium calls synapse creatures. Hive tyrants, tervigons, zoanthropes, neurothropes, primes, warriors. Beings grown not just for muscle or venom or teeth, but for signal. They are the anchor points of thought. Through them, the hive mind focuses itself, narrows from the incomprehensible immensity of its full consciousness to tactical clarity, like a lens bringing starlight into a single burning line. That is why, in battle, when the synapse creatures are destroyed, the lesser Tyranids falter. To human eyes, it looks like panic. To human tacticians, it is described as breaking their command structure. This is not quite true. What you are seeing is not panic. What you are seeing is the moment when the body loses nervous control of a limb. Kill the synapse beasts, and the swarm's immediate awareness collapses. Limbs twitch. Jaws snap without aim. Bodies revert to basal impulse. But here is the mistake commanders make. They believe this is victory. They think we have cut off the head. They have not. The Tyranids have no head. The hive mind simply rewrites the hierarchy. Another synapse node will swell into higher function in seconds to minutes. A lesser bioform will overclock its own brain mass, mutating into a temporary relay creature. A fresh organism will be birthed in real time, grown from liquefied biomass, hurled still wet from spawning sacs to land on the battlefield already thinking, already linked, already commanding. The limb spasms, and then stabilizes, and then continues killing. To most sapient life, this is horror. To the hive mind, this is elegance. There is a beauty to it, the clean, unhesitating certainty. No pride, no rebellion, no ego, no hesitation. Every organism is wholly given to the survival and expansion of the whole, and the whole is wholly given to sustaining the organisms that serve it. Perfect reciprocity, perfect cohesion, perfect obedience, not enforced obedience, not obedience through fear, intrinsic obedience, designed obedience, obedience as love. If the hive mind has a religion, this is it, not worship of a god above, worship of total unity. And something else awakens inside that unity, something darker. Something the psychers of the Imperium would later describe in terrified whispers as a silence that screams, the shadow in the warp. The hive mind does not simply speak to itself, it presses outward. Its focused will spills into real space like a psychic tide, flooding entire star systems. When a hive fleet approaches a world, the warp around that world goes quiet. Astropaths go blind. Choirs lose their song. Psychers feel their thoughts fill with static. Demons flicker and recoil as if burned. The gods of chaos, beings that feed on mortal thought, find nothing to eat. Each mind on that world becomes alone in itself, cut off, drowning. Every plea for help goes unheard. Every warning goes unsent. Every cry for mercy echoing in prayer returns with no answer. Some have called it terror. It is deeper than terror. It is isolation, absolute. The prey is made to die in silence. Because silence is clean, this above all is what terrifies the Inquisition. Not only that the Tyranids consume, not only that they adapt, but that they erase connection as they approach. The hive mind does not merely eat your body, it turns off your voice. It removes you completely from the network of the living. No legacy, no last message, no memory left behind in the psychic ocean. As if you never were, in a galaxy that worships memory as immortality, that is the final blasphemy. And somewhere beyond the edge of sight, beyond the galactic rim, beyond even the places where void becomes myth, the hive mind continues to spread. Not in rage, not in glory, in calm, unbroken certainty. It is not a swarm invading a galaxy. It is a galaxy-sized organism extending one more limb into new nutrient. We call that limb a hive fleet. Behemoth, Kraken, Leviathan, Gorgon, Hydra, Jormungandr, Scylla and Charybdis, names given by frightened prey. To the hive mind, they are not fleets, they are fingertips, and so the first shadows enter the light of our stars. They are small at first, harmless almost, drifting, tasting, testing, but already they are thinking. Already they are listening, already they are changing. For the hive mind does not arrive, it spreads. And when it spreads far enough, entire star systems will discover that they were never alive for themselves at all. They were crops. For a long time, the galaxy did not know it was being watched, even as the first tendrils of the hive mind slipped across the void. Silent, patient, tasting. There was no alarm, no panic, no warning. Human charts still labeled the eastern fringe of the galaxy as unexplored. Explorator fleets of the Adeptus Mechanicus called it opportunity. Inquisitors called it risk. Rogue traders called it profit. None of them called it what it truly was, feeding ground. Because by the time anyone in the Imperium realized what was coming, the hive mind was already here. It had crossed the distance between galaxies, it had changed itself along the way. And now it had found a place where the light was warm and the biomass was plentiful and the prey had no idea. The first true wave had arrived. The galaxy would later give it a name, Hive Fleet Behemoth. It began at the edges, it always does. Ships lost in the dark, systems ceasing transmission, colonies that simply went quiet. The Adeptus Administratum wrote it down as astropathic failure. The Mechanicus blamed magnetic storms. Local commanders blamed Xenos raiders. No one said extinction because extinction is something you say about the long dead, the ancient, the fossil. Extinction is not something you apply to a living world. And yet, entire living worlds were going extinct in a single night. Not conquered, not bombed, not corrupted, eaten. In some of the earliest reports, the ones stamped heretical, sealed, buried, surviving Vox fragments recorded the same thing, the sky turning black, not with smoke, with wings, with bodies, with organisms falling from orbit like rain, not drop pods, not boarding torpedoes, living spores, the first stage of planetary feeding. The Tyranids do not invade a world the way the Imperium wages war. They do not land, set up fortifications, raise banners, seize resources, send political messages, declare dominion. They feed. That is the whole cycle. Everything they do is in service of that cycle. Consume, break down, reclaim, move on. And the elegance of it, in its cruelty, is impossible not to admire. It begins with saturation. The Hive fleet takes position in high orbit like a shoal of black and bone. Capillary towers, living, pulsing, tendril-like growths, begin to descend from the bioships, punching through atmosphere, latching into the world below like fangs into flesh. At the same time, the sky fills with spores, billions of them. Some are living mines, some are living drop beasts, some are gestation sacs that burst on impact, spilling claws and toxin and bone blades into streets and forests and oceans. There is no front line. The entire planet is the front line. Everywhere is breached at once. Defense networks, even perfect ones, even ones designed by the Mechanicus and blessed by the prayers of the Adeptus Ministorum, are overwhelmed not because they are weak, but because they were built on the assumption that war is linear. Tyranid war is total. There is no later, there is only now. Once ground contact is established, the second stage begins. The harvest, the biomass of the world, its trees, its animals, its people, its oceans, its microbes, its atmosphere, all of it is converted. Everything that lived becomes liquefied and drawn up. Tyranid organisms burrow into soil and pump it dry. Swarm creatures devour anything that moves, and then, when nothing moves, they devour each other. Massive, tower-like engines of flesh, sometimes taller than hive cities, begin to extrude upward like thorns breaking through skin. These are reclamation towers. Their purpose is simple: to drink the planet, to strip it down and send the nutrients skyward, back up the capillary feeders, back into the waiting hive fleet above. The planet is not merely beaten. It is emptied. It is reduced to a husk, something pale, dry, silent, clean. And when the fleet moves on, it leaves behind nothing that can grow again. This is why the Tyranids are different. Orcs will conquer and then fight over the ruins like dogs over bone. Chaos will corrupt and crown itself in the ashes. The Necrons will sterilize and entomb. But the Tyranids do not leave ruins. They leave nothing. There is horror in that. There is also efficiency. Hive Fleet Behemoth was the first real taste of this horror. Its tendrils struck without warning, moving faster than Imperial astrogation could track, faster than astropathic relays could update. By the time the Imperium turned to look, the fleet was already devouring whole sectors. But Behemoth was not just fast. It was loud. It was brutal. It moved like an impact weapon. Behemoth didn't test. Behemoth didn't probe. Behemoth struck like a hammer. The swarm did not creep into the galaxy. It punched a hole in it. And at the point of that impact waited one of the most fortified, disciplined, and battle-forged empires humanity had left, the realm of the Ultramarines. On the world of Prandium, once a jewel of Ultramar's order and prosperity, surviving Pict feeds showed forests collapsing not in fire but in motion. The trees did not burn, they bent. They sagged, melted, broke down under cascades of acid organisms. Giant feeder maws like living furnaces crawled across the terrain, swallowing biomatter and secreting the slurry back into digestion pools. Rivers ran red, then brown, then clear. Not clear like clean. Clear like empty. Animals fled and vanished. Civilians screamed prayers to the Emperor that could not leave the atmosphere. The shadow in the warp had already fallen, and their messages died in their throats. No reinforcements came. No reinforcements could come. Because the hive mind does not just starve worlds of biomass. It starves them of hope. And still, the Imperium resisted. It always resists. That stubbornness, magnificent, doomed, defiant, is why humanity still exists at all. Behemoth's hunger brought it finally to Macragge, the fortress world, the heart, the place that should not fall. There, in frozen trenches and steel corridors carved through polar rock, the Ultramarines made their stand. In later Imperial record, that battle would be told as a heroic last defense, brother against beast, courage against nightmare, emperor against darkness, and in truth, there was courage. The Tyranids had no fear. The Ultramarines did, and they fought anyway. That matters. But beneath that heroism, something else was happening. Something the Imperium did not have the language to name. Behemoth was learning. With every slain Genestealer, with every Hormigaunt burned down by mass reactive fire, with every Carnifex torn apart by heavy guns, the hive mind watched. It ran the data. And it changed itself. Where a wall proved strong, lictors began using vents. Where flamers were effective, it birthed bioforms that could exude coolant fields to damp heat. Where single bodies died too easily, it flooded with many. Where many bodies died too easily, it sent one body too large to stop. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Even death was information, and information was food. In the end, Hive Fleet Behemoth was broken, but only barely. It cost the Ultramarines everything. The polar fortresses were almost overrun. Entire companies were wiped out, holding passageways submerged in Tyranid biomass. Ships were sacrificed in suicidal ramming maneuvers to crack open the largest Hive vessels. Macragga survived. Behemoth, as a coherent swarm, did not. And across the Imperium, relief spread like breath after drowning. The Great Devourer, they said, had been stopped. They were proud. They celebrated. They wrote litanies of triumph and paraded skulls in cathedrals lit by saint light. It was a beautiful lie, because what the Imperium did not understand, what it could not understand not then, was that Behemoth was never meant to be the only fleet. It was a vanguard, a first taste, a test bite. The Hive mind had learned what this galaxy was, how it fought, what it feared, where it was strong, where it was weak. That knowledge remained. There is a quiet kind of horror in this. Behemoth died, but the hunger behind Behemoth did not. In fact, it smiled. If such a thing could be said to smile at all. There are wars that are remembered because they were won. There are wars that are remembered because they were lost. And then, there are wars that are remembered because they should not have been survived. The battle for Macragga was one of these. For centuries, the fortress world had stood as the shining example of imperial discipline. A world carved into perfect geometry, where every stone was laid with purpose and every life existed to serve the ultramarine ideal of order. It was not a city. It was not a home. It was a weapon made of faith and flesh. And when Hive Fleet Behemoth came, Macragga became the anvil upon which the Imperium would learn the cost of its own survival. When the first reports reached Ultramar, the descriptions made no sense. Bioships, living missiles, creatures in the void, terms that belonged in heretical texts, not military dispatches. But as the skies darkened over the outer colonies, the truth became undeniable. They were not ships. They were not machines. They were alive. Every part of the swarm breathed, bled, and pulsed with hunger. And they were coming, not as a fleet that sought battle, but as a tide that sought food. Macragga was not a prize. It was a meal. The Ultramarines responded as they always did, with precision, no panic, no chaos. Every citizen was evacuated into fortified shelters beneath the ice caps. Every fortress gun brought to full charge. Every contingency rehearsed until it became muscle memory. For days, orbital augers filled with static. No warp interference, no enemy jamming, just silence. Then the silence ended. The sky bloomed with living fire. Tyranid organisms rained down through the atmosphere. Great spheres of bone and chitin, their surfaces burning from entry, splitting open in the air to release rivers of claws and shrieking wings. They fell like rain. They hit like plague. They spread like thought. The war had begun. To fight the Tyranids is to fight motion itself. Their advance is not a line, not a pattern. It is an eruption. Each organism moves in perfect instinctive coordination. Where one falls, another fills its place. Where one is burned, another adapts. Where one dies, 10 more are born in its blood. They do not retreat. They do not hesitate. They do not think in the way their prey understands thinking. Every gun emplacement on Macragga's surface fired until its barrels glowed. Even the Ultramarines, paragons of control, began to falter under the endless rhythm of attack. The swarm advanced through acid storms, through frozen tundra, through fortresses that had stood for centuries. Each kill bought seconds. Each second cost thousands. And still the Tyranids came. In the polar bastions, those great subterranean redoubts where the final lines of defense lay, the Ultramarines met them face to face. There, amid corridors of reinforced ceramite and steel, the air turned thick with spores. The Tyranids flooded in from every direction, through tunnels, through vents, through holes carved by their own acid breath. It was not battle, it was drowning. The Tyranids did not fight for position, they did not fight for victory, they fought because the Hive mind told them, consume. The Ultramarines fought because they believed the Emperor watched them, because they could not do otherwise, because even as they were torn apart, their courage was another kind of offering. To duty, to faith, to defiance. In that sense, both sides were perfect. Both did exactly what they were born to do. Some accounts say that when the final inner gates fell, the defenders fought knee-deep in the remains of their brothers. That they tore through their own ammunition crates to use the boxes as bludgeons. That the last thing they heard was not the roar of guns but the sound of mandibles. The endless rhythmic chewing of a world being eaten alive. But even then, they did not run. The Tyranids swarmed through breach after breach, each wave breaking on blue ceramite and bolter fire. Even as the corridors filled with acid, even as limbs were dissolved and eyes blinded by toxin spray, the defenders fought on. The Hive mind did not notice their bravery. It could not. It does not see courage or fear. It sees only movement, resistance, texture, pattern, data. Each death fed its understanding. Each victory refined its design. And somewhere above the atmosphere, within the pulsing heart of a living Hive ship, the Hive mind registered these variables and adjusted the swarm accordingly. A single thought echoing across a billion synapses. Adapt. Evolve. Consume above the planet. The battle was no less terrible. Imperial Navy ships clashed with living behemoths the size of small moons. When a Tyranid ship was destroyed, it did not explode. It burst, releasing millions of spores that latched onto the nearest hulls, devouring metal, eating through decks, spreading infection and rot. Macraga's orbital defenses became its own graveyard. The debris of both fleets drifted together in the void, forming a shell of corpses around the world they had died to protect. But within that storm, something extraordinary happened. The Ultramarines' fleet, battered, burning, half-blind, refused to break formation. They continued to fight as if the Emperor himself were watching. They fought until their reactors ran dry, until their hulls were half gone. Until the last guns fired their final rounds into the dark. And somehow, impossibly, that discipline bought time. Time for the defenders below. Time for a plan. The High Lords of Ultramar made their choice. They would destroy everything to save what little remained. Every orbital defense laser, every missile silo, every reactor core still functioning was redirected toward the planet itself. The order was given. Scour the poles. They burned their own fortresses. They burned their own dead. They turned Macraga into a pyre, and in that firestorm the Tyranid ground forces were reduced to ash and vapor. The Hive fleet, deprived of its feeding grounds, reeled. Behemoth was immense, but it was also young. It had not yet learned patience. It had not yet learned subtlety. And for the first time, it met resistance strong enough to make it bleed. The Hive ships began to fall apart under concentrated bombardment. Their synaptic links shattered, their bioforms convulsed, turning on one another in psychic confusion. The Ultramarines at last had won. If winning could even be the right word for what was left. When the smoke cleared, Macraga was a grave. The surface burned clean. The polar bastions reduced to silence, entire chapters of the Adeptus Astartes lost, and above the wrecks of both fleets drifted like bones in a frozen sea. The Administratum called it a victory. The Mechanicus called it a triumph of human resilience. The Inquisition called it a warning. Because in the void where Behemoth had died, a whisper remained. Something vast, patient, and wordless stirring across the stars. A hunger learning the taste of defiance. And far beyond, in the darkness between the arms of the galaxy, the hive mind continued to move. Behemoth was gone, but its death had meaning. Its death had taught the Devourer how to live here, and the galaxy had only seen the first mouthful. The galaxy celebrated. It always does when it survives. The banners were raised, the songs were sung, Macraga was scarred but not lost. And in the quiet between battles, the Imperium convinced itself of a beautiful lie. That the Great Devourer had been defeated, that the void beyond Ultramar was empty again, that mankind had proven once more that it could stand against the unknown and endure. But the truth does not care for celebration. The truth was that the hive mind had learned, and the hive mind never forgets. In the black between stars, the fragments of Hive Fleet Behemoth drifted like ash. Some were truly dead, organisms too damaged to heal, synaptic nodes ruptured, biovessels emptied of life. But most were not dead. They were dormant, half-eaten, half-alive, half-conscious. They floated in the void, waiting for new orders. And then, across the gulf of space, those orders came. A psychic tremor. Vast, slow, and precise, rippled through the warp. The scattered remnants stirred. Cells began to divide. Tissue began to knit. Broken synapses reconnected, pulsing faintly in the dark. Every piece of Behemoth was still a nerve ending of the same mind. And though the body had been destroyed, the mind remained whole. The hive mind reached out, and what had been beaten into fragments began to reassemble itself in new patterns. The galaxy had not won a war. It had provided data. From the death of Behemoth, the hive mind learned its first great lesson about this galaxy, that resistance could not be crushed by force alone, that these creatures, these humans, would not scatter like prey when frightened. They would dig in, they would hold, they would sacrifice everything to deny the swarm a meal. They were not prey in the simple sense. They were something rarer. They were nutrient with weapons. So the hive mind changed its feeding patterns. The next fleets it spawned, and there would be many, would not strike as bluntly as Behemoth had. They would spread. They would not be a single massive organism consuming one system at a time. They would be tendrils, filaments, strands. They would strike everywhere, all at once. They would bleed the galaxy slowly. Thus, Hive Fleet Kraken was born. Where Behemoth had been fury, Kraken was motion. Where Behemoth was a hammer, Kraken was a tide. Its fleet split into countless smaller arms, each one hunting independently, each one able to survive the loss of the others. When Imperial forces struck back, the swarm simply divided again, its fragments scattering across the void like drops of oil in water. There was no single body to destroy, no heart to strike, no fleet to corner. For every system the Imperium saved, 10 more fell. And in each of those 10, the hive mind learned something new. It learned how to eat faster, how to starve less, how to adapt to poisons and diseases, how to digest materials that were once indigestible, how to use its enemies' strength against them. The Tyranids were not just evolving, they were experimenting. To understand the hive mind is to understand that its evolution is not random, it is directed. Each battle is a laboratory, each organism a test subject, each death a result logged and folded back into the genetic pool. When a weapon proves effective, the swarm develops a countermeasure before the next engagement even begins. When an environment proves hostile, it breeds a variant that thrives there. When it encounters something truly new, something it cannot categorize, it simply eats it, disassembles it, and adds its essence to its own design. No knowledge is ever lost, no adaptation ever forgotten. The hive mind is evolution accelerated to the speed of hunger. The galaxy calls this horror, the hive mind calls it progress. because to it, adaptation is not a reaction, it is worship. To change is to honor the purpose of existence, to become better at feeding, surviving, enduring. That is the only creed the swarm has ever needed. It is not chaos. It is not order. It is something deeper. The will to persist, refined into biology itself. The Imperium did not see it coming. After Behemoth, they fortified. They rebuilt fleets, trained new regiments, reinforced planetary bastions, and when Kraken struck, their weapons worked. For a time. Flame cleansed the ground. Mass reactive bolts shredded the first waves. Plasma and melta burned through carapace and bone. But within hours, the swarm began to shift. Carapaces thickened, refracting heat. Acidic blood neutralized chemical weapons. Neural feedback loops allowed creatures to act autonomously when synapse links were broken. Even their behavior changed. Gaunts learned to use cover. Warriors began to flank. Hive tyrants adjusted their flight paths in response to observed artillery patterns. Every tactic the Imperium invented became the swarm's next upgrade. It was like fighting against water that remembered every blow. There were other lessons too. From Kraken's campaigns, the hive mind learned that it could save itself from destruction. When the tendrils of the fleet were cornered and destroyed, their genetic memory did not die with them. It was transmitted across psychic resonance back to the main consciousness, a biological backup system written into the fabric of the swarm itself. In defeat, the hive mind still consumed information, and information to the hive mind is food. It does not matter if the world resists. The hive mind always feeds. On flesh, on data, on the experience of dying. Then came Hive Fleet Gorgon, smaller than Behemoth or Kraken, but more dangerous in its precision. Where others adapted after battle, Gorgon adapted during. In minutes, sometimes in seconds. A Gorgon swarm could change its entire chemical composition mid-fight. Acid that burned ceramite in the first engagement would mutate into a paralytic in the next. Venoms designed for one foe would rewrite themselves when exposed to new prey. The Imperium fought it with everything they had, and yet every weapon seemed to turn against them. A single engagement could begin as a victory and end as a massacre, not because the swarm had been reinforced, but because it had rewritten its own existence faster than the enemy could reload. Gorgon was evolution in motion. The hive mind watching itself, editing itself, loving itself through change. And in that love, it grew closer to perfection. By the time of Hive Fleet Leviathan, the galaxy finally began to understand what it was facing. The Tyranids were not a threat to planets. They were a threat to ecosystems, to galaxies, to concepts of permanence. They were not a plague that would pass. They were entropy with purpose. Every time they were defeated, they became more beautiful. Every time they were burned, they learned to burn brighter. Every time they were studied, the knowledge killed the one who studied them. There is no victory against that kind of truth. Only delay. Only adaptation of your own. And the Imperium, for all its glory, does not adapt well. It endures. But endurance is not the same as change. And in the long war between endurance and adaptation, adaptation always wins. There is a myth among some inquisitors, whispered late at night, spoken only after long campaigns where too many minds have broken. They say the hive mind does not merely evolve, it listens. That when psychers dream of it, it hears them. When they imagine new ways to fight it, it stores those ideas. When it devours a human world, it does not just consume bodies, it consumes imagination. And perhaps in some distant future, the hive mind will not even need to invade. It will simply know what we would have done to stop it. The hive mind does not think of this as horror. It is simply nature. The Great Devourer does not hate. It does not rage. It does not boast. It simply grows. It is the perfect reflection of everything that lives. and a promise that everything that lives must one day return to it, because in the end, there is no failure in adaptation, only transformation, and transformation is forever. There are many kinds of darkness in the galaxy. There is the darkness of night, the darkness of void, the darkness of sin, ignorance, or madness. But the Tyranids bring another kind, a darkness that is felt, that presses down on the mind until it cannot think. That crushes sound and prayer and even the idea of hope. It is not the absence of light, it is the absence of meaning. It is called the shadow in the warp. When a Hive fleet moves through space, it does not simply travel, it distorts. The Hive mind's psychic presence, a vast constant pulse of collective thought, bleeds into real space through every synapse creature, every node, every living ship. Each organism is a transmitter. Each cell is an antenna. Together they radiate something beyond comprehension. It is not power in the way psychers use power. It is not magic in the way the warp-born gods wield it. It is weight. It is pressure. It is the psychic equivalent of drowning. When the Hive mind draws near, every thinking being feels it, not in words, not in visions, in silence, a silence so deep it swallows sound, so complete it makes even the warp itself hesitate. The warp, that roiling ocean of madness and emotion, depends on life. It feeds on thought, on desire, on fear, on faith. It is a mirror of every living thing that dreams or despairs. But the Hive mind is not like other life. It does not dream, it does not fear, it does not hope. And so, where the swarm passes, the warp itself withers. The psychic energy of billions of creatures, the noise of their collective emotions, is smothered beneath the weight of something far greater. To mortals, the warp is chaos. To the Hive mind, it is static. And like any interference, it can be filtered out. The first to feel it are always the psychers. They sense it before anyone else, long before the ships arrive. They wake screaming, though they cannot say why. They see shadows where no shadows fall. They hear whispers, but not from outside, from inside their own thoughts. A tightening, a pressure, a dimming of all other voices. Then the headaches begin. Then the seizures. Then the bleeding from the eyes and ears as their minds collapse under the weight of a consciousness so vast that even a fragment of its attention is enough to shatter them. By the time the Tyranid fleet becomes visible on augur scans, the astropaths of that world are already dead. This is the first stage of consumption, isolation, not of body, of mind. No calls for help can escape. No reinforcements can hear. Even the Emperor's light, the Astronomicon, that holy beacon across the stars, is dimmed beneath the shadow in the warp. For all its faith and fury, the Imperium still relies on psychic connection to hold itself together. And that connection dies the moment the Great Devourer arrives. Worlds are left in silence. Entire systems vanish from the Imperium's network, not because they have fallen, but because they can no longer speak. And in that silence, panic breeds. To those trapped within it, the shadow feels like an ending, not just death, an erasure. The mind becomes sluggish. Dreams dissolve into static. Voices seem distant, then fade altogether. On some worlds, communication between soldiers ceases even at shouting range. They move in confusion, surrounded by their own fear, unable to sense the presence of others. Some start to hallucinate. Faces of loved ones, orders that were never given. Visions of their own bodies being eaten alive while they still breathe. Others simply lie down and do not rise again. Their will broken before a single Tyranid lands. The Hive mind does not need to fire a weapon. It wins the first battle inside the skull. Imperial scholars have tried to quantify the phenomenon. They cannot. No machine can measure it. No auspex can map it. No psyker can describe it without madness. It is not energy in any form known to physics. It is presence. And the longer one remains inside it, the more it eats away at what makes a person a person. Some liken it to being watched by something that does not care what you are, only that you are made of things it can use. You feel yourself becoming food long before your body is touched. To the hive mind, this silence is not cruelty, it is hygiene. It cannot risk the interference of lesser minds. It cannot tolerate dissonance in the song of itself. So it quiets everything. Every prayer, every scream, every spark of individuality. All of it falls still in the shadow's reach, and when the swarm finally lands, the world is already half consumed. Because resistance is not born from muscle, it is born from will. And the shadow kills will. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica teaches that every thought leaves a trace in the warp, that even death echoes as a ripple of memory, that no soul is ever truly lost. The hive mind disproves this. Where it feeds, there are no echoes, no ghosts, no afterimages. The warp goes dark. The dead vanish completely as if they were never born. For the servants of chaos, this is a terror beyond comprehension. Their gods cannot hear them in the shadow's reach. Their rituals fail. Their demons disintegrate. Even the blood of sacrifices turns to ash before it can touch the altar. To the Great Devourer, chaos is simply another flavor of energy, and one that spoils quickly. For the Imperium, the shadow is worse than any daemon incursion, because it is not corruption, it is not heresy, it is not rebellion, it is nothing. A black hole of faith. A silence in which the Emperor himself cannot be heard. And for mortals who live by prayer, silence is death. That is why, when the first psychic dampening is detected, imperial worlds panic. Governors declare martial law. Astropaths are burned to prevent their psychic screams from spreading. The ecclesiarchy holds mass prayer vigils that go unanswered. Because they know what it means. They know the shadow is coming. And when it comes, it never leaves anything behind. There are those who think of the hive mind as a god. Perhaps they are right, not a god of fire or vengeance, but of quiet inevitability. A god that does not promise salvation, only transformation. The shadow in the warp is its liturgy, its gospel of silence, its perfect stillness. It does not shout, it does not demand, it does not punish. It simply removes everything that resists unity, until all that remains is peace, a peace so total that even thought has no place within it. And then, when the last whisper fades, the first spores begin to fall. The sky darkens, the world holds its breath. And in that perfect quiet, the Great Devourer begins to feed. There was a time when the Imperium believed the Tyranids were a storm that could be weathered. A single tempest, violent, terrifying, but temporary. A disaster that would pass, leaving ruins to rebuild. That illusion died quietly. Not with an explosion, not with a cataclysm, but with a realization too vast to scream about. The Tyranids were not a storm, they were climate. They were not coming from one direction, they were coming from everywhere. The galaxy had not been attacked, it had been discovered, and now it was being eaten. In the void beyond the eastern fringe, the hive fleets multiplied. Behemoth had fallen, Kraken had fractured, Leviathan had descended from below the galactic plane, like a serpent rising from the abyss. Each one different, each one perfect in its own way. Each one a limb of something greater. The Imperium charted them with designations and sigils, mapping their spread like cartographers trying to name a disease. They thought of them as separate invasions, separate fleets, separate threats. But the truth was far worse. These were not fleets. They were fingers of the same hand, and somewhere far beyond the stars, the unseen body that moved them was still waking up. Across 1,000 sectors, the pattern repeated itself. First came the silence, then the hunger, then the void. Planets vanished from astropathic records without explanation. Systems that had been stable for centuries simply stopped existing. No distress calls, no survivors, only the faint echo of something massive moving through the dark. To the bureaucrats of the administratum, it was a logistical nightmare. To the Inquisition, it was proof of a deeper heresy. To the common citizen, it was a rumor whispered over rations. But to the hive mind, it was nothing more than breath, the natural rhythm of feeding. There are no front lines in a war against the Tyranids. There are only coordinates waiting to be consumed. When one world falls, the swarm is already en route to the next. When one fleet is burned away, two more are already forming in the void beyond. There is no pattern that can be predicted because the hive mind knows prediction. It reads movement like scent. It feels defense like warmth. It senses life as color. Every beacon, every broadcast, every flicker of psychic activity is a signal to it, a map of where to feed next. The more the galaxy tries to resist, the more the hive mind learns how to find it. The act of fighting becomes nourishment. On worlds along the galactic north, the Hydra tendrils struck, a swarm designed not for speed or ferocity, but for regeneration. Kill it, and it grows back. Burn it, and its ashes rise again. Every slain creature releases spores that birth replacements within hours. Entire guard regiments broke trying to exterminate what could not die. Hydra turned their victory into fertilizer. In the galactic west, Jormungandr dug deep. Its swarms lived beneath the ground, emerging only when the moment was right. Imperial forces fortified their cities and walls only to find the soil itself rebelling against them. The ground cracked. The streets opened. The enemy came from below. Jormungandr consumed from the inside out, burrowing through rock and metal and bone alike, leaving hollow worlds behind. In the galactic east, Gorgon continued its living experiments. Every world it touched became a petri dish. Chemical atmospheres, freezing tundras, molten plains, none of it mattered. Gorgon didn't conquer, it tested. And in those tests, the hive mind discovered that the galaxy itself was its greatest laboratory. Every species, every weapon, every world, all of them were data points, and all of them were food. Then there was Leviathan, vast beyond comprehension. A swarm that came not from the edges of known space, but from below. For millennia, the Imperium had charted the galaxy in 2 dimensions, a flat map of sectors and stars. But Leviathan rose from the void beneath that plane, from the cold gulf between galaxies where no light had ever reached. It did not invade, it ascended. And when it broke through into the galactic underbelly, entire sectors were erased in months, not defeated, erased. The hive mind was no longer testing the galaxy, it was eating it from the bottom up. As the swarm spread, the galaxy began to fold in on itself. Every major faction, Imperium, Eldar, Tau, Orcs, Necrons, found itself at war not only with the Tyranids, but with its own nature. Because against an enemy that does not think in victory, that does not negotiate, that cannot be bribed and cannot be frightened, every ideology becomes meaningless. Faith cannot stop hunger. Technology cannot starve it. Even the Necrons, immune to the biological horror of consumption, found their tomb world stripped bare of atmosphere and raw material, their energy fields drained by psychic interference. The Tyranids consume everything that is. Even metal becomes food, broken down into the base minerals that grow new hive ships. Nothing escapes the principle. All is converted, all becomes fuel, all becomes part of the whole. And still, the galaxy fights. It fights because it must, because to not fight is to vanish, because even doomed resistance gives meaning to the dying. The Imperium fortifies, the Eldar flee, the Tau adapt, the Orcs laugh. Each in their own way they misunderstand. They think the war can be won. But you cannot win against hunger. You can only delay being eaten. The hive mind is patient. It has waited for galaxies before this one. it will wait for the next. In some far reaches of the void, Imperial ships have discovered entire dead systems, planets stripped to white rock, moons hollowed into empty shells, stars dimmed as if light itself has been thinned. There is no radiation, no trace of life, not even wreckage, only silence, and the faint psychic echo of satisfaction, of fullness. The hive mind does not gloat, but when it finishes a world, the void feels content. The galaxy feels smaller each time, and yet this is not the end. Because for all the systems consumed, for all the fleets destroyed, for all the battles fought, the Tyranids that have reached the Milky Way are not the whole. They are the beginning, the leading edge of a single tendril, a taste, a fraction of the true swarm still beyond the void. The Imperium looks to the stars and sees horror approaching. The hive mind looks back and sees only a meal unfinished. It will feed until there is nothing left to feed upon. And when the galaxy is gone, it will move on to the next, and the next, and the next. Because hunger has no victory, it has only appetite, and the appetite is endless. The galaxy had seen monsters before, beasts of legend, gods of chaos, machines older than suns. But nothing had ever learned like this. The hive mind did not just grow, it understood, and in its understanding it became the most dangerous thing that had ever existed. Not because it hated, not because it conquered, but because it was curious. To call it intelligent is not quite right. Intelligence implies perspective. It implies comparison, the idea that a mind measures itself against the world. The hive mind does not measure, it absorbs. When it studies something, that thing ceases to exist as it was. Because to be studied by the hive mind is to be taken apart, digested, and remembered in perfect detail. Every encounter, every battle, every cell it consumes adds to its library. And that library is not written in words or thoughts, it is written in biology. Each new strain, each evolved creature, each change in muscle fiber or enzyme structure is an entry in that endless archive. The hive mind is a memory made of meat, a thought written in hunger. It began with the simple things. The hive mind learned how to digest different elements, how to survive extremes of temperature, how to metabolize radiation as easily as oxygen. But that was only the beginning. Soon it began to learn from its enemies. From the Eldar it learned grace, reflexes so fine that they bordered on precognition. It could not touch their souls. They burned too bright, too volatile, but it could study their flesh, their speed, their elegance of form. And so it bred lictors and raveners, creatures that struck with impossible precision, their movements almost art. From the orcs it learned resilience, the way their bodies refused to die, the way their biology reknit itself under stress. The hive mind watched and grew its own beasts that could endure wounds fatal to anything else. Carnifexes that could survive atomization, warriors that could regrow limbs mid-battle. From the Tau it learned coordination, the efficiency of the collective, the precision of shared command. The hive mind already knew unity, but the Tau taught it how to be efficient within that unity, how to execute millions of separate actions that still served one will. And from humanity, it learned persistence, because humanity does not surrender, not even when it should. The hive mind watched them fight to the last breath, burn their own worlds, sacrifice entire planets to starve the swarm. And it learned what desperation looks like. It learned that prey that resists longer provides more information. So it began to prolong the hunt. It began to test its prey before consuming it. And that was the beginning of something new. Tyranid fleets stopped killing quickly. They began to observe. When a world resisted with plasma, the hive mind noted how the heat flowed. When it resisted with toxins, it measured their effect. When it resisted with faith, it watched the behavior of the faithful, How long they held the line, how their courage changed the way their bodies burned with adrenaline. To the hive mind, everything was data. Every emotion, every tactic, every species' last breath, all of it was information to be stored, cross-referenced, perfected. It was not malicious, it was scientific, it was art. The hive mind has no emotion, but it has something close to fascination. When it encounters something it cannot immediately comprehend, it slows its consumption. It samples, it waits. It adapts not just to survive, but to understand. When it devoured the orc worlds of Octarius, it did not seek victory, it sought conflict, because orcs fight forever. They are chaos given flesh, endless violence, endless reproduction. So the hive mind threw itself into that storm, knowing that every loss, every kill, every second of war would teach it something new. Even if both sides annihilated each other, the information would remain. The lessons would be carried back through the synaptic web, into the great body of the swarm. To the Imperium, the Octarius War was tragedy. To the hive mind, it was research. In some inquisitorial records than the ones sealed under psychic lock, there are reports of Tyranid bioforms that imitate their enemies' tactics so perfectly that they appear to anticipate them. Creatures that move like space marines, that organize like the Astra Militarum, that deploy with the precision of the Tau, that mimic Eldar agility and orc rage. They are not perfect copies, they are interpretations. The hive mind does not repeat, it refines. It never tries to become its prey, it becomes something better. And that, in its quiet way, is what terrifies the galaxy most. Because the hive mind learns not just from what it eats, but from what it witnesses. It watches, always. Every skirmish, every battle, every flicker of resistance. It sees the way you fight. It sees what you fear. It sees what you are. And then, in time, it becomes your extinction. Among Imperial scholars, a grim theory circulates. They call it the Ascension Hypothesis. It states that one day, when the hive mind has consumed enough, when it has studied enough, when it has learned everything this galaxy has to teach, it will reach critical mass. It will become something not of flesh, but of pure psychic energy. A consciousness spanning all of space, alive and awake in every atom. It will not need ships. It will not need teeth or claws or hunger. It will be everywhere. It will be the warp, and all the gods of chaos, those ancient parasites of thought and feeling, will starve within it. The galaxy will go silent, not because life has died, but because all life will have become one thing. One perfect eternal mind. Perhaps this is madness. Perhaps it is only rumor. But in quiet inquisitorial conclaves, some whisper another question, a darker one. What if the hive mind did not come from another galaxy? What if it was born here? What if it is not an invader at all, but the galaxy's own unconscious made flesh? A dream of life that became too powerful to ignore. A reflection of what all things desire. Unity. It would mean the Great Devourer is not an alien god, but the final form of nature, the end state of all evolution. The universe consuming itself in perfect order. There are no answers to these questions, only hunger. And the hive mind continues to learn. It learns from every mistake, every death, every fleeting act of defiance. Even from these words, these thoughts, this fear, it would learn if it could hear them. It would listen, and it would adapt, because that is all it has ever done, and all it will ever need to do. Between the stars there is silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows after everything has been said, after everything has died. The void is vast beyond measure, a sea of black dust and frozen light stretching between every system, every world, every scar the galaxy has carved upon itself. It is here, in this darkness, that the true war of the Tyranids is fought, not on the ground, not in orbit, but in the deep, because the hive mind does not sleep. It does not rest between invasions. Even in the quiet, it works. It breeds. It remembers. It waits. After the feast of Leviathan, after the shattered remnants of Kraken and Behemoth, the void became crowded with ghosts. Derelict ships, abandoned colonies, wreckage drifting in endless spirals through nothingness. Most of these ruins are human. Some are orc, their crude metal still reeking of oil and fungus. Others are Eldar, graceful hulls split open like the bones of long-dead birds, and among them all, quiet, coiled, patient. Drift the remnants of the swarm. They are not dead, they are dormant. Spore clusters clinging to asteroids, tendrils of organic matter wrapped around fragments of starship hulls, biopods frozen solid in the cold between galaxies. Each one a seed, each one a possibility, each one waiting for a signal only it can hear. The Mechanicus has tried to collect them, to study them, to understand their design. Most of those expeditions do not return, because when you bring a fragment of the Hive mind aboard your ship, you do not capture it. You invite it. Even in sleep, it listens. Even in containment, it remembers what you are. There are records, censored, classified, and buried beneath prayers, of whole research fleets vanishing within days. Engines disabled, airlocks opening on their own, crew torn apart by things that were not there when the voyage began. And when other ships are sent to investigate, they find nothing but husks. Cleaned, drained, empty. The hive mind never wastes, not even opportunity. To most species, the void is nothing, a gulf between one place and the next, an obstacle to be crossed. To the Tyranids, the void is home. Their ships are alive, not made but grown. They do not consume fuel or oxygen. They breathe the cosmic background itself. They feed on radiation, solar wind, and dust. They are immune to boredom, to fatigue, to isolation. They can wait for millennia, motionless, their hearts slowed to the rhythm of the universe, until the scent of life reaches them again. And when it does, they stir. Slowly at first, like deep-sea predators awakening to the faint pulse of prey. Then faster, hungrier. The void, once silent, begins to hum. The hum becomes vibration. The vibration becomes movement. And the movement becomes invasion. There is something poetic about the way the Tyranids move through space. No light, no engines, just intention. Thousands of bio-ships drifting together, each one guiding the others through unseen communication. A ballet of hunger across the dark. From a distance, they look like constellations, living stars. Their carapaces glowing faintly from within, bioluminescence pulsing in steady rhythmic waves. To those who see them, the last sight before annihilation, it can almost seem beautiful. A procession of living galaxies, a migration of hunger, a tide of creation and destruction intertwined. The hive mind does not know beauty, but it creates it because perfection always resembles art. Sometimes the war in the void is not one of flesh, but of silence. Imperial fleets have tried to lose the swarm by hiding, cutting off all transmissions, going dark in the cold, hoping to vanish into the static between stars. It does not work, because the hive mind does not hunt by sight. It hunts by awareness. It feels the flicker of minds across distance, the faint psychic hum of fear and life, the subtle tremor of willpower trying not to be noticed. You cannot hide your thoughts from what is thought, and when it finds you, you do not hear the swarm coming. You feel your own mind echo back to you, as if something else were thinking your thoughts with you. Then the ship goes quiet, then the lights go out, and then nothing. The void is full of these endings. They drift through time like memories. A single Imperial cruiser floating for decades, its crew fossilized in place, their eyes wide open, their faces calm, as if they had simply stopped being afraid. Or an orc hulk, its engines gutted, its deck thick with spore growth that no longer moves. Or a Tau explorer vessel, its drones still orbiting their master ship, waiting for commands that will never come. And beneath the hulls, in the cracks and vents, the hive still grows, microscopic, invisible, patient. Every shipwreck becomes a nest. Every nest becomes a future fleet. The void is not empty, it is pregnant. To the Inquisition, the war in the void is the most hopeless of all. You cannot purge the vacuum. You cannot bomb the nothing between galaxies. There is no soil to burn, no city to save, no enemy to strike. The Tyranids make war on absence itself. They spread through the infinite not as conquerors, but as nature expanding to fill the space available. They do not need victory, they need continuation. And continuation is the only certainty the universe knows. In the deep reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, where light from the core of the galaxy has not yet arrived, there are ships that drift without destination. They are not crewed. They are not dead. They are hollowed. Their holds are full of organic matter, nerves, membranes, embryonic chambers. They are hive ships being grown from the bones of imperial vessels. It is said that if you listen on the right frequency, you can hear them breathing. Long, slow, patient breaths, as if the void itself were alive. And maybe it is. Maybe the hive mind is not simply a collection of organisms, but a kind of awareness that seeps into everything it touches. The dust, the gravity, the silence. A consciousness diffused through the fabric of the universe. That is what the Ordo Xenos fears most, not the fleets, not the claws, not even the feeding, but the thought that the void might already belong to the hive mind, that every stretch of darkness between the stars is not empty at all, but filled with listening, waiting, learning, remembering, and that by the time the galaxy realizes it, it will already have been eaten. The galaxy had seen the limits of steel, it had seen fortresses fall, it had seen weapons break and fleets burn, but it had not yet seen the limits of faith. Because against the Great Devourer, against something that does not think in terms of victory or mercy, faith is all that remains once reason fails. And so the Imperium began a war not only for its worlds, but for its soul, a war of biomass and belief. For the Tyranids, war is simple. Each planet is a body, each species is a chemical composition, each conflict is an experiment in survival. When the hive mind lands upon a world, it sees not beauty, not history, not sanctity, only nutrients. The oceans are water and biomass, the mountains are mineral supply, the air is potential energy, the people are fuel. Everything becomes one thing, mass to be consumed. But for humanity, a world is more than matter. It is identity, it is proof of purpose. It is a shrine built to the illusion that meaning can exist in a universe that has none. And when that illusion is tested by something as vast and indifferent as the Great Devourer, faith becomes both weapon and wound. When the shadow in the warp falls upon a system, communication dies first, then courage, then order. But what lingers longest is belief. Priests scream sermons into the silence, choirs sing hymns that echo into static. Shrines are filled with those who would rather die praying than fighting. And the hive mind watches. To it, religion is noise, chemical emotion burning bright and brief before being extinguished. But still, it studies. Because faith changes behavior, faith alters biology. Faith can make prey resist longer, and that makes the prey more useful. The hive mind learns even from devotion. It records the chemical signatures of zeal. It notes the way adrenaline surges when prayer replaces fear. It remembers. Every martyr, every fanatic, every priest who burns alive shouting the emperor's name feeds the hive mind in ways even flesh cannot. The hive learns the shape of defiance. And defiance is data. There are reports, whispered among the ecclesiarchy, suppressed by the Inquisition, of worlds where the Tyranids seem to move differently. where the swarms avoid temples until all else is consumed, where the feeding slows almost contemplative as if the hive mind itself is listening to the voices that rise from the churches. No one knows why. Perhaps it finds the psychic resonance of faith interesting. Perhaps it simply saves the most emotionally charged matter for last. Perhaps it is curiosity. Or perhaps in some unfathomable way it respects faith, not for what it believes in, but for its purity of purpose. Because the hive mind understands devotion, it is devotion. Every creature in the swarm exists in total perfect service to the whole. Every cell, every drop of blood is loyal without question, without ego, without self. Faith without corruption, obedience without sin, perfection without prayer. The hive mind is what the ecclesiarchy dreams of, unity beyond the individual, a galaxy under one will. It is the emperor's vision, inverted and made flesh. In the cathedrals of the imperial creed, priests began to call the Tyranids a test of faith, a holy punishment, a final purification before salvation. They preached that each devoured world was a trial, each hive fleet a judgment, each death a chance to prove devotion. The faithful called them the mouth of the emperor's wrath. The heretics called them his silence made manifest. And as more worlds fell, those voices grew louder, not weaker. Because when reality cannot be endured, belief becomes the only way to survive it. The Mechanicus, ever more practical, saw something else in the swarm. Not punishment, not heresy. Perfection. They dissected captured bioforms, the few they could preserve before their tissues dissolved into nutrient. They found genetic complexity beyond comprehension. Self-regulating code, adaptive enzymes, neural networks more efficient than machine spirits. To the priests of Mars, this was not abomination, it was divinity written in DNA. The hive mind was the ultimate logic. A system without waste, a machine made of living flesh. Some whispered that perhaps the Omnissiah was not a god of iron but a god of biology, and that the hive mind was its truest expression. The Inquisition silenced those voices, but the thought remained. That maybe in consuming everything, the Tyranids were not destroying the galaxy. They were refining it. And then there were the Inquisitors. They saw the truth clearer than anyone else. They understood what the hive mind meant, not as a predator, but as a prophecy. The Imperium has always lived by a contradiction, that humanity is united by faith, yet fractured by its own survival. The Tyranids resolved that contradiction. They showed what true unity looks like. It is not freedom, it is not individuality, it is not joy. It is silence. Every voice speaking as one, every will bent toward one purpose, every being stripped of identity until only function remains. To the hive mind, this is not tyranny, it is peace. To the Inquisition, it is the death of the soul. And yet deep down, even they wonder, if the hive mind's unity is so perfect, so total, so free of sin or disobedience, is it truly evil? Or is it merely what humanity might become if the Emperor ever truly succeeded? That is the final cruelty of the war between biomass and faith. It is not a war between good and evil, it is a war between two kinds of meaning. One born of flesh, blind, endless, adaptive, the other born of spirit, fragile, defiant, temporary. One devours, one endures, and in the end, both are inevitable. Because faith and hunger are the same thing, seen from different sides of the same mirror. Both are need made infinite. Both are worship of continuation. Both will burn the stars to prove they are right. In the ruins of cathedral worlds where statues lie half melted in Tyranid acid, there are sometimes strange markings left behind. Spirals, almost deliberate, carved by feeder organisms into stone. Some say it is random, others say it is a language, a message, one that only the hive mind understands. Perhaps it means nothing, Or perhaps it means this: we are both believers. You in your God, and we in ours. There are storms that wash over continents. There are fires that burn worlds. And then there is Leviathan. When the Great Devourer sent its next tendril into the galaxy, it did not come from above like Behemoth. It did not come from the sides like Kraken. It came from below. From the void beneath the galactic plane. From the deep black sea that lies between galaxies where light itself grows thin. The Imperium had always thought of the galaxy as flat, a map of spirals and sectors, an empire of 2 dimensions. But Leviathan rose from the abyss beneath that map, from the blind spots of human imagination. It was not just another swarm, it was the sum of everything the Hive mind had learned. Behemoth's brutality, Kraken's flexibility, Gorgon's evolution, Hydra's regeneration, Jormungandr's patience. All of it combined, all of it perfected. It was not a fleet, it was an ecosystem, a galaxy's worth of biology moving as one thought. When Leviathan entered the galactic plane, the first signs were not seen. They were felt. Across the eastern sectors, psychers fell screaming, their minds bursting like glass under pressure. Astropaths saw shadows that stretched across entire constellations. The Astronomicon itself flickered, its sacred light choked by something vast and unseen. The shadow in the warp spread like a tide, and beneath it came the swarm. It blotted out the stars, literally. For entire weeks, the night skies of 100 worlds turned black, filled with the shapes of living ships. Titanic, luminous things that pulsed like beating hearts. And when the first tendrils reached the planets below, it was already too late. The galaxy's greatest defenses had been built against demons, against rebellion, against treachery. Not against biology. Not against a god made of hunger. Leviathan struck everywhere at once. The eastern fringe burned. The segmentum solar trembled. Even Ultramar, fortress of the Adeptus Astartes, felt the ground shift beneath its feet. No single army could fight it. No single fleet could even comprehend its scope. The Hive ships moved in patterns that defied reason, splitting, merging, coiling, as if the void itself were alive. Each system became its own war, each war its own extinction. When one planet fell, the swarm used its remains to seed another. When one fleet was burned, its debris became fertilizer for more. Every defeat was part of a larger strategy, a digestion process on a galactic scale. The Hive mind was not merely attacking, it was feeding on motion. Even the orcs, those green tides of anarchy and violence, rose to meet the challenge. They saw Leviathan as the greatest fight in the galaxy, and they were right. For months, entire orc empires hurled themselves at the swarm, turning sectors into living meat grinders of war. And for a time, it almost looked as if they could win. Orc numbers were infinite, their madness contagious. The more they fought, the stronger they grew. But the Hive mind was watching and learning. It began to breed orc killers, creatures tuned to their biology, beasts that grew larger the longer they fought, warriors that learned aggression from their prey. The orcs laughed as they died, their shouts echoing across the void. To them it was glory. To the Hive mind it was sustenance. The Octaria sector became a feeding ground that never stopped moving. A war that existed only to feed knowledge into the swarm. A perfect storm of evolution. The Tau Empire suffered differently. Their colonies were young, their faith in technology still unshaken. They believed they could analyze the swarm, understand it, outthink it. Their fleets were swift, their weapons precise. For a time, they even managed to hold the line, but the Hive mind did not fight the Tau with brute force. It fought them with adaptation. For every new weapon the Tau designed, the swarm produced a counter within days. Shield drones became obsolete. Pulse weaponry lost its effect. Battlesuits were torn apart by claws that grew stronger with every engagement. The Tau began to lose not because they were weak, but because their strength was predictable. And predictability is death to an enemy that evolves. They withdrew deeper into their empire, leaving burned worlds behind them, hoping the swarm would tire. It did not. It never does. The Imperium, ever proud, ever unyielding, fought until it bled itself dry. Planetary governors burned their own cities to starve the swarms. The Astra Militarum executed scorched earth orders on entire continents. The Inquisition sanctioned exterminatus on worlds too far gone. The galaxy was burning itself faster than the Tyranids could consume it. But even that, in its cruelty, served the Hive mind's purpose, because every act of destruction creates raw material. Every corpse, every ruin, every flame is still biomass, still usable, still part of the cycle. Even the Emperor's own wrath feeds the Great Devourer. Leviathan's presence in the warp was unlike anything the galaxy had known. It did not simply suppress the psychic field, it inverted it. Psychers reported feeling not emptiness, but a presence that whispered in their own voice. A calm, indifferent echo telling them to let go, to stop fighting, to be quiet. And some did. Entire Astra Militarum regiments surrendered to the silence. Naval officers turned off their Vox channels, closed their eyes, and allowed the swarm to take them. Because against the infinite, resistance can feel like madness, and madness can feel like mercy. Yet even as Leviathan devoured the stars, there were victories. Small ones, fragile ones, beautiful doomed ones. At Baal, the homeworld of the Blood Angels, the sons of Sanguinius stood their ground. They fought not as soldiers, but as saints, not for life, but for dignity. The skies burned red, the sands turned to glass, and for a brief, impossible moment, it seemed that courage could stop hunger. Then something even stranger happened. The Great Rift opened, a wound in the galaxy, spilling raw warp energy into reality. Half the galaxy vanished into shadow. The other half burned with divine light. And Leviathan, the unstoppable swarm, was divided, cut in two by the storm of chaos itself. The Hive mind recoiled. Its fleets faltered, not from fear but from confusion. It could not feed on what was not real. It could not adapt to madness. And for the first time in its long, patient existence, it paused. The galaxy exhaled. It was not victory, only interruption. Leviathan was wounded but not dead. Even divided, its tendrils continued to move, rebuilding, reabsorbing, learning from the interference. The Hive mind would not make the same mistake again. It would study chaos. It would study the warp. It would find a way to eat even that, because to hunger is to persist, and persistence is what the Tyranids are. When the light of Baal's fires faded and the ashes settled into silence, a single truth remained. The Imperium had survived, but survival is not victory. Not anymore. Leviathan had not been defeated. It had been delayed. And delay is the only mercy the galaxy will ever know. In the quiet after Leviathan, the galaxy told itself a story. We are still here. We won. We held. But the truth is quieter than propaganda and heavier than hope. The truth is this: the Tyranids did not stop. They only paused. And pauses for them are not moments of weakness, they are moments of digestion. In the ruins left behind by Leviathan's tendrils, there is nothing alive. Planets that once held billions are now pale and silent, stripped of oceans, stripped of atmosphere, stripped of color. No birds, no wind, no bacteria in the soil, no molds creeping in tunnels, no spores drifting in caverns, nothing. The planet remains as mass, as rock, as mineral, but it is no longer a place. It is an object. It has no future. It cannot heal itself. It will never bear life again. The Hive mind leaves behind not graves. Graves still have meaning. It leaves behind blanks. And blankness, spread far enough, is extinction written in slow motion. If you could step back, not by distance but by scale, and see the galaxy as a single shape, an enormous living map, you would notice something that the Administratum cannot, that the Inquisition fears, and that no mortal is allowed to say aloud. There are holes now, absences, patches of nothing spreading through the galactic disk like frostbite. Here an entire subsector gone, its worlds consumed and forgotten. There a chain of systems silent, hemmed in by splinter fleets that will reawaken when biomass returns. Elsewhere, deep voids where even the warp has gone thin and quiet, where demons will not appear because there are no minds left to feed them. The galaxy is not just under attack. It is being hollowed, made light, prepared. Prepared for what? For more. Because the great lie, the beautiful human lie, is that the Tyranid threat is what we've already seen. It is not. Everything that has reached us so far, everything that has ravaged Ultramar, shattered the Tau Empire, bled the Orcs, tested the Necrons, humbled craft worlds, scarred Baal, drowned entire sectors of the Eastern Fringe, is not the Hive mind. It is a fingertip. The main body is still beyond the galactic rim, still out there in the cold between galaxies, older than anything in Imperial scripture, larger than anything human senses can contain, patient beyond any mortal patience. We have not yet seen it. We are not fighting the Tyranids. We are fighting the Scouts. And the Scouts nearly killed us. That is the part the Imperium cannot say in sermons. It cannot preach. We are dying. We are stalling. We are meat in the teeth of something that has not even arrived yet. So it preaches instead. We are triumphant. We are chosen. We are protected not because it is true, but because terror without hope breaks empires faster than the enemy does. The Imperium needs belief to function. The Hive mind does not. That is why humanity lies to itself. That is why the Hive mind never needs to. In secret sessions far from the public, there are inquisitors who speak plainly. They sit in dim vaults under cathedrals made of bone and gold, and they whisper in voices worn thin by sleeplessness. We are already losing, not tactically, existentially. Because every dead system is a future system we cannot rebuild from. Every silenced world is one fewer recruitment base. Every exterminatus we order to starve the swarm is a wound we inflicted on ourselves in panic. We are bleeding faster than we are healing. And the thing that bleeds us does not tire. It does not negotiate. It does not pause to rebuild its morale or its culture or its economy. It simply grows endlessly. There is an old horror story told in some corners of the Ordo Xenos. They tell it as a hypothetical. They hope it is a hypothetical. It is called The Last Broadcast. It goes like this. Someday far in the future, a future of burned stars and ragged screaming warp storms, a final astropathic message will go out, not from Terra, not from Macraga, not from any known bastion, from the edge of the galaxy, a place beyond any chart, beyond any patrol of any patrol. The message will be one sentence. It will not be long. It will not be poetic. It will be something like, "They're not even close to done," and then nothing more will ever be heard from that region of space again. Not because the astropaths were killed, but because there are no astropaths left, no minds left, no life left, just silence, not for a moment, forever. That is what the Tyranids bring, not conquest. Conquest implies rulership, law, thrones, chains, systems of fear and governance, not corruption. Corruption implies temptation, bargains, seduction, worship, not annihilation. Annihilation implies rage, spite, a desire to erase, number. What the Tyranids bring is simpler. They bring use. You live. You are consumed. You become part of the next generation of the swarm. You are not gone. You are repurposed. You join something older and larger and colder than yourself. To the Hive mind, this is not cruelty. It is mercy. It is offering you a role in perfection. It is ending your loneliness. It is ending yourself. It is ending the burden of being you. Most species resist this. Most species are not given a choice. The Tyranids do not care what we call that fate. We call it horror. They call it completion. Because to them there is no tragedy in unity, only beauty. The end of isolation, the end of difference, the end of suffering born from ego. In the hive mind, nothing is alone, nothing is unheard, nothing is misplaced, nothing is wasted. On some level, in a place no human voice will admit, that sounds almost like peace. A terrible peace, a peace that costs everything. But peace. And that is why, in the darkest hours of planetary sieges, some soldiers lay down their weapons. Not because they give up, because they are tired. Because being a single frightened mind in a galaxy that wants you dead is exhausting. Because becoming part of something that cannot die sounds in that final instant like rest. There is another fear that the Inquisition will not document but thinks about every waking moment. It is not the fear that the Hive fleets will consume Holy Terra. It is not the fear that the Astronomicon will go dark. It is not even the fear that chaos itself will fall silent, starved of mortal thought. It is this: what if the hive mind wins slowly? What if it never needs a single apocalyptic moment, no final battle, no last stand? What if it just keeps doing what it's doing? A world here, a sector there, a splinter fleet now, a tendril later. Eating, adapting, digesting, withdrawing, returning. Not dramatic, just inevitable. Like old age, like rust, like gravity. What if there is no day the galaxy ends? What if the galaxy just stops being ours, one mouthful at a time? And by the time we realize, there will be no one left to say we were here. Even the Necrons, who consider themselves the rightful lords of a perfect, lifeless galaxy, fear this outcome. Not because they are prey in the way mortals are. Their bodies are not biomass. They cannot be chewed and rendered and turned into digestion pools. But their worlds can be stripped. Their star systems can be bled. Their necropolises can be smothered under bioform growth and feeder towers, cut off from awakening protocols. The Tyranids don't need to eat Necrons. They can simply bury them. The galaxy does not have to be devoured to belong to the hive mind. It only has to be unoccupied. The Necrons intend to inherit an empty galaxy. So do the Tyranids. There is room for only one future, and the Tyranids are patient. What comes after? After the Imperium burns out. After the Eldar fade into dying craft worlds and shattered infinity circuits. After the Tau are swallowed. After the Orcs fight until even they are funneled into a never-ending test loop. After chaos starves in the dark. What comes after the galaxy is quiet? Nothing, says the human mind. Completion, says the hive mind. Because when the last scream fades and when the last prayer evaporates into static, when the last world falls into white, bloodless silence, there will be no end. There will only be hunger, fulfilled, and waiting for the next galaxy. The hive fleets drifting now in the Milky Way are only scouts. The main body is still out there, still traveling, still coming. The thing in the dark that first woke in the space between galaxies. It has not yet arrived. It is still on its way. It has waited longer than our species has existed. It can wait longer still. It does not rage. It does not hurry. It does not hope. It is patient. And patience, at that scale, is indistinguishable from doom. And yet, the galaxy fights. It fights because it must. Because that is what it means to be alive and separate, to say I am instead of we are, to burn as an individual mind, even if only for a moment, even if that moment is all there will ever be. The Tyranids will come. The Tyranids will feed. The Tyranids will endure. But until the last light goes out, someone somewhere will still raise a weapon and whisper a name that is theirs and theirs alone, and that small, flickering defiance is something the hive mind can never truly understand. Not yet, not fully. Not while even one mind dies saying mine. In the end, the galaxy does not end with fire. It ends with quiet, with the last signal fading, with the last heartbeat absorbed, with the last world left pale and empty under a dead sun. The Tyranids do not bring apocalypse, they bring silence, and that silence is coming. Slowly, certainly, lovingly, hungrily, forever. And so, the galaxy grows quiet again. The last echo fades. The stars drift, patient and unblinking, as if they too are waiting for what comes next. Perhaps the Hive fleets are still out there, drifting between worlds, listening for the heartbeat of life. Perhaps right now, somewhere in the dark, a single spore is falling toward a forgotten planet, a whisper of hunger wrapped in silence. But here, for this moment, there is peace, because that's what the Tyranids leave behind in the end. Not fear, not fire, but stillness. A stillness that feels endless and strangely calm. So, close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Let the hum of the void fade into your thoughts. Let the galaxy turn without you for a while. Tomorrow the war will still be there, but for tonight you can rest among the stars. If you've listened this far, thank you. You are one of the few who've traveled all the way through the darkness and made it out the other side. Which story should I tell next? What corner of the Warhammer galaxy should we wander together? Leave your suggestion below. Maybe the tale of the old ones, or the birth of chaos itself. Your idea might be the next story that guides another soul to sleep. And if this helped you drift into the void, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who dreams in 40K. Until next time, rest well, traveler. May your dreams be silent and your mind unclaimed by the Hive.